of us in card collecting have different condition issues that matter the most to us. But when it really comes down to it, the two biggest issues for most collectors are centering and having sharp corners. So the question here is, what is really king? What is really the most important aspect? Now, most aspects of card condition matter to most of us. But here the question is, what aspect matters the most of all? So when we look at different condition issues, we have having sharp corners, having nice centering, having nice edges, having a nice surface. Does the color quality and clarity look nice? And there are other issues as well, like print lines and print spots and wax stains, all of the other issues that come into play when talking about looking at card condition. But for this particular video, I really want to look closely and make the argument of whether corners or centering are more important. So I posted this poll on my YouTube channel the other day, and after about 6 days, I checked in on it and there were almost 200 votes. And overwhelmingly, people cared more about centering than having sharp corners. Now, as a kid, I cared about having sharp corners. I wanted those corners to be perfect. Centering didn't matter as much to me. But as I get older, I'm starting to think that the eye appeal, that centering matters maybe most of all. It kind of drives me crazy when a card's a little bit off center. So we're going to take a look here and we're going to make an argument both ways. And we're going to really analyze this topic over the next few minutes. So for a lot of us, the thing that's most important are the corners, because if a card is off center, that's not the fault of anyone. That's not the fault of the collector. That card is as pack fresh as it was when it was pulled however number of years ago. So when you think about, what's going to bug me the most? If the card looks exactly like it did when it was pulled out of a pack, how am I going to feel like that card is not a really nice card? Now, some people would say man-made damage is worse than factory damage. I mean, think about that. If a card was produced that was off center, but then somebody tweaked a corner, put a crease in it, messed up the edges, didn't care for it, that to me could potentially show that that card was not cared for. That card was not preserved in the way that it was produced. And that might bug you more than centering. So the last thing is, what's rarer? Is it rarer to find a card, a vintage card, that's in really nice condition? Or is it rarer to find a card that is perfectly centered? So I think you can make the argument that the rarer card is the more demanded card because there are less examples out there. So I think you could say that corners being really sharp is more important than a card being perfectly centered. So a lot of you have been asking to look at my collection and see some of it. So I wanted to show you some of my cards. So here's a 1960 Topps Jim Brown card. And this has a PSA 7. And if you look at the corners, they're pretty darn nice. But the card is certainly off center. I have a Rick Barry rookie in 1971 Topps. And again, these corners are literally perfect. But the card is fairly off center. For me, I don't mind that this particular card is off center because the corners are so sharp. I kind of need it to be centered or really nice corners. Here's a Johnny Unitas. This is a second year, 1958 Johnny Unitas. All of these are from my collection. And it has pretty nice corners for a 58. This one's in a PSA 6, but again, it's off center. For me, I don't mind that these cards are off center. You could really make a strong argument that centering is the most important thing of a sport card that you might want to purchase or own and look at for an extended period of time. I mean, I know for myself, eye appeal is really important. You don't want a card that is distracting to look at. If a card is so off center or it's twisted, because for me, for example, I'm not into the diamond cut. Diamond cut drives me crazy. I'm pretty OCD. A lot of us collectors are. But high eye appeal, a card that is enjoyable to look at. And when it's off center, it just kind of gets you feeling uncomfortable. I don't know what it is. You know, the other thing is wear, like corner wear and surface wear a lot of the times, that's man-made. And so for a lot of us, we don't mind that because we're like, that is proof that the card has been loved, that the card has been enjoyed, that it is a card that has exchanged hands and been looked at. So that doesn't bother us. But when the production, when it's never looked good, the story is it always looked like that versus a card that is perfectly centered and it does have some wear on the edges or on the corners. And it just shows you this card has been loved and enjoyed for a long time. You really could make that argument that centering is king. So more cards from my collection. These ones are centered but have soft corners. So this is my Thurman Munson rookie. It's a 4 with a mark on it. I think I bought this card for like $22. And when you pull it up close, yeah, it's got some printer marks on it. And on the back, yeah, there's a little pen mark there you can see. And the corners are certainly soft, but when you just look at it, it's a nice looking card. It's got great eye appeal. For $20, I'll take that all day. So this is a 59 Jim Brown, a second-year Jim Brown. Look at the eye appeal. Now, when I pull it up tight, you can see those corners are soft. It's a 6. They've got a touch. But the centering is awesome. The color and the clarity are awesome. I mean, look at that card. It's a beautiful looking card. And you could make the argument that is better looking than sharp corners that are off center. This is a 5.5. I love this Jim Brown card. I collect a lot of Jim Brown stuff. The corners are soft. I mean, look at them. They've got a little touch. It's a 5.5. You can see little print marks on there. But it's well centered. When you pull it back a little bit, man, that is a nice looking card. I'll tell you what. So let's compare a couple. So we have a rookie Bob Gibson in a 3 and another in a 4. Now the one on the left is perfectly centered. The one on the right is clearly off center, but is significantly sharper. The one on the left is a PSA 3. And the one on the right is a PSA 4. Which of those two do you prefer? If you could have either one of those, which one would you choose? That's really the question. Well, when we look at the centered one, again, it's got pretty soft corners. That card sold for $555 recently. Now, ultimately, a person's vote is with their wallet. This was an auction, and this sold for $555 in a 3. The 4, again, here's a look at the 4. Much nicer corners, but clearly off-center. And it's a better grade. It's a 4 instead of a 3. It sold for $545. I'm sorry. It sold for less. So this one's a 4 instead of a 3. Much sharper corners. But the centered one with the lower grade sold for more. That tells me that people out there seem to prefer centering. Regardless of the grade, regardless of the corners, they want a centered card. Here are two 1960 Mickey Mantles. The one on the left is a 4. The one on the right is a 5. The one on the left is really well centered. The one on the right has nicer corners, but is fairly off-center, especially top to bottom. Left to right is okay, not perfect by any means. But the one on the left, the PSA 4, is really well centered. So when we look at these two cards, let's look first at the PSA 5, the one with the sharper corners. It sold for $715. Again, fairly off center, but much sharper corners, and it is a 5. Now, to me, that's a really nice looking card. But then when you look over at the one that's well centered in the 4, but look at that centering. It is clearly softer corners. It sold for about $30 less. So what, 4% less? So it's a lower grade and softer corners. But because of the centering, it sold for almost the same price as the 5 with sharper corners. So here's some more of my cards. Now, I like cards with sharp corners. I like cards that are centered. And then I've got my Joe Montana. This card to me is like a 9. I don't know how it got an 8. It's got the centering. It's got the corners. PSA, I don't know what your deal is. I don't know how this card is an 8 instead of a 9. But this card to me has it all. It's beautiful to look at. It's got the sharp corners and it's got the centering. Now, this is probably my grail basketball card, the Magic Johnson Larry Bird rookie card. Now you can see here it's got a couple of little print marks on it. I'll be honest with you, those print marks don't bother me because that card came out of the pack with those print marks. The centering side to side is pretty good. When you flip it over, it's a little bit off top to bottom, not much. On the back, a little bit, but the corners are razor sharp. Those print marks, they don't bother me at all, but they might bother someone else. But I was all over this card because the corners are great and the centering is pretty good. Now, here's another one. This is another one of my cards from my PC, my Gale Sayers rookie, and this card got a 5. Now, if you look along the right, you see this rough cut. I mean, that rough cut is how the card came out of the pack. That was a dull blade that cut this card. There is no fault of any collector along the way. This is how the card came out of the pack, and it got a 5. So, I don't think I've answered anything. I don't think I've settled anything. You know, if we got into this big debate, whether it's centering or corners, to me, the answer, if you had to crown one, is centering. And the reason I say that is because the poll that I posted overwhelmingly shows that that's what people care about. The prices of cards that sell at auction, the centered ones overwhelmingly, they sell for more than the off-centered ones. And at the end of the day, a person's vote is what they're willing to spend money on. We could make a strong argument for corners. But if people pay more for centering than corners, it doesn't matter what we think. Appreciate you watching as always. I don't have all the answers, but I just like to put stuff out there.